everybody. I'm Connie Stewart with SimplySimpleStamping.com, and I'd like to welcome you to my Masterclass Tuesday Tip Series. Hey, today we're going to be talking about dry embossing. So dry embossing is where we're going to be using embossing folders and a die cutting / embossing machine to create some beautiful raised images on your greeting cards. Now, there's a lot of different techniques. I'm excited to share as many as I could come up with. I think I've got about 15 to share with you. So even if you're familiar with dry embossing, I think you're going to hopefully pick up an extra tip or two. And if you're brand new to stamping, you're definitely going to want to jot down some notes on all the different unique ways that you can use dry embossed images. Are you ready to get started? Okay, we're going to head over to my stamping table and get started with today's Tuesday tip. So you'll find all the embossing folders on page 184 and 185 of our annual catalog. That's the 2021 annual catalog. Here's something you're going to notice. So you notice some of these are in mint macaron and some of these are in just jade. That's because they actually distinguish two different types of embossing folders. Everything here that's in mint macaron, you're going to see 3D next to each of those. And then, of course, just plain embossing folders, if you will, on the others. Now let's talk about what that means. We're going to start with just regular embossing folders. So the first thing you're going to be able to notice, they're very flexible and they're also much thinner than the 3D embossing folders. Now we have in a 6x6, we have the woodland embossing folders. All the other ones that are regular are going to be these minis. Now what's great with these, of course, is they're going to work in our mini cut and emboss machine. And these also work great just by adding some little extra embellishments and die embossed images to your cards and things. But you're going to feel a big difference between the regular ones. Now let's bring in the 3Ds. These are thick. They're not very flexible. They're super strong. And when we say 3D, what we're talking about is it's going to give you a much more deep, detailed texture. I love working with the 3Ds. I definitely love getting more bang for my buck. I love getting all that deep texture. Now, the way you use these, whether it's a 3D and whether it's a regular, is a little bit different. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to bring in the two bases from my cut and emboss machine. Plate number 2, I want you to pay attention right here. Do not use with embossing folders. Okay, we're going to get that out of our way because we are definitely not using plate number 2. Plate number 1, however, we are going to use, it says right here, with standard embossing folders. These thinner ones, remember the flexible ones, that's what we're going to call a standard embossing folder. Now, you're going to see the sandwich that you're going to use here, which is plate 1, which I've got right here, and 2 cutting plates, number 3. And that would be these right here. So I would put a cutting plate down, my embossing folder with the cardstock inside, and another cutting plate, number 3 plate. Again, that's for a standard. Now let's talk about what we need to do when we're working with the 3Ds. So with the 3Ds, we need the number 1 plate and the number 4 plate. This is a special embossing folder for these thick embossing folders. And what you're going to do here is just plate number 1, your embossing folder, again with the cardstock inside, plate 4, and you'll run that through. Now, if your die cutting machine is different, you may need to play with that. You may need to add a shim if that's necessary. Really, you're just going to want to play. But for the most part, I think most machines are going to work that way. Another tip you need to know when you are dry embossing is to pay attention to the folded end of your embossing folder. Because when you use that and you run it through, guys, we always want the folded end to go into the machine. All right. All right, now let's go ahead and do a basic dry embossed card. I'm going to zoom in because I want you to see all the detail that is in this embossing folder. This one is the Painted Textures 3D embossing folder. By the way, this can be found in the January through June 2021 catalog. Love this look that it gives. So let's go over real quick how to do a basic dry emboss. So we just talked about the sandwich. Remember, it's a 3D. It's not flexible. So I know I'm going to need plate 1 and 4. I'm going to open up my folder. I've got a piece of crumb cake cardstock. You're just going to lay this inside the embossing folder. And can you see, I want to line up my score line with the edge of that embossing folder. Because if we were to come around here, and let me remove this so you can see, well, we're going to have this edge, and we don't want that. So we're going to open this up. We're going to line up our score line right there with the edge, and then we're going to close this. If this were a pattern, like a horizontal or vertical pattern, you would want to pay very close attention and make sure that your cardstock is placed in here straight, all right? When that's ready to go, you're going to place it here on your base plate 1. But Connie, if you were to run it through that way, you would destroy that cardstock. Yes, I would. So I'm going to turn it around. So you always want to make sure the right and left sides of your plate are free and clear. So we've got that set. You notice it's tight fit. So you want to make sure that is set perfectly there on your plate. Remember, it's cutting plate 4 on top. I'm going to bring in my machine, and we're just going to start to give that just a little push, all right? And it's kind of off camera there, but it kind of gave my handle a little tug. Tells me it's ready to go. We're going to run this through, and I'm just going to kind of give you a heads up right now. It's a tight fit, all right? You might feel that really be a little tight. And did you hear that pop? That popping sound is when the rollers came off the edge of that embossing folder. So if you hear that, don't worry, you didn't break anything. All right, and now I have got a gorgeous dry embossed image. And you notice I've got the reverse image here on the inside of my card. So if you like that look, this is an awesome way to kind of get double duty because you have it on the outside of your card and the inside of the card. Now, what if you don't want that? So let me bring in another card. And can you see I have a little edge around this? And of course, the inside of the card, there's no embossed. How did I do that? I have a piece of matching cardstock crumb cake, 4 by 5 1/4, and you're going to place that inside your embossing folder. We're going to run it through in the exact same way. Hey, remember a second ago I told you, I talked about it being straight. Well, there's no pattern to this. So if I'm a little crooked in here, guess what? I don't have to sit there and putz with it. It's absolutely fine. And of course, once I run that through my embossing folder or through my die cutting machine through the folder, you can see I've just added that to the front of my card and I can work from there. So you can keep it with the texture on the inside, or if you don't want that, you can just create a layer. And I think it gives a nice extra look. So remember here, I talked about the outside and the inside. Well, we have embossed and debossed. So this is a really good example here. I've got my hammered embossing folder, and it's a 3D. Again, you can tell that because there's such great detail going on here. But I'm going to zoom in. Can you see the difference? One, I have all the little, I'm going to call it kind of alligator. I guess hammered, but I don't know, it kind of looks like alligator to me. You notice all the little bumps are raised out. And on this one, they're all going in, and it's the outline that is prominent. So remember, when it comes to your embossing folders, you actually have the ability to use them 2 different ways. And this brings me to my next technique, which is embossing on foil sheets. Oh my goodness. Tell me you guys are not blown away by all that gorgeous foil going on, and what a great card or a start of a card for masculine, right? We always struggle with those masculine. And I really thought this with that hammered was perfect for the guys. And again, whichever's your favorite. You can use the embossed or the debossed, whichever you prefer. Another way I love to use my dry embossing folders is to create just a really nice focal image. So here I'm using the ornate floral die. This is a 3D. And can you see I have a piece of mint macaron cardstock. This is 2 1/8 by 5 1/2. I ran that through my embossing folder, which you've seen me do. I added that to the side of my card, and then I just added a little strip. I felt like it needed some separation, so I just added a little strip of some of our foil sheet. This is now ready for my focal image. But do you see all that great texture? And I didn't have to do anything here to the inside of the card because I added a layer. Now let's talk about doing that exact same thing with vellum. Oh my goodness, do I love dry embossing on vellum cardstock. Do you notice the white pop? When that vellum bends, it comes out white. So boy, you can get a really amazing look when you run a piece of vellum through an embossing folder. So in this case, this is a 2 by 5.5. And do you see that layer? I just wanted to give it a little extra. So I have a layer that's 2 1/8 by 5.5. Again, a card that is now ready for me to add my focal image. But yeah, I think that embossed vellum is definitely going to be the star of this card. I want to piggyback to this card for just a second because I wanted you to see how I did that exact same technique, only this time, and remember, you've kind of seen it, but I only ran my embossing folder through part of my card base. And remember, we talked about how that piece and how that image is going to show through on the inside. And I hope that you can see it's here, but it's not here. And now all I have to do is add maybe a sentiment, maybe a little focal image, a flower or something right here. And I've got a really great card. Now let me show you how to do a partial emboss. I have a 4 1/4 by 11-inch piece of cardstock. You're going to place that inside your embossing folder. And oh, look at that. This is what I was talking about when I said you want to make sure that your cardstock is in your embossing folder straight. This one has some definite straight lines. So I tend to just find the images and I line them up from left to right, top to bottom. I'm now ready to go. And you're going to run it through your embossing folder in this direction. And this brings me to a good point. If I had this card and I wanted to go this way, well, I got a problem. I can't get that through my embossing folder. It's only going to work if we go this direction. Not to worry. Remember what we did here. We just cut another piece of cardstock and we could lay it on top. So not, like I said, you can go in the other direction, but you are going to have to create another piece of cardstock if you want your card to go like this. And that will actually go the opposite direction if you're using 5.5 by 8.5. Just remember, if it doesn't work in your embossing folder, you're just going to want to cut a piece of cardstock the same size that you wanted that embossed partial image on your card base. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, if necessary, that's what you're going to do. I love getting creative with my embossing folder, and I thought you guys might enjoy this card. I took a piece of 3 3/4 by 5-inch cardstock and I cut it 2.5 by 3, 2.5 by 2, 1 1/4 by 1 1/4, and 1 1/4 by 3 3/4. All right, so I really just cut it 2.5, and then I cut these pieces down. And I think you can see I ran each piece through an embossing folder, and that gave me just a really nice little pretty look, something a little more texture than just one. I decided to have some fun with 4 embossing folders. This is another favorite technique I love to do. I love to take the flaps of my envelopes and run them through the embossing folders because it gives such a pretty look. To do that, I have my Tasteful Textiles 3D embossing folder, and we are simply going to put our envelope into the embossing folder. You can see it's going to run through my machine this way. Again, you're going to want to make sure you're lining up the edge of your envelope with the edge of your embossing folder, and you get that gorgeous, look at that, it kind of looks like linen. Let's take this one step further. We could emboss the entire envelope, and I am going to tell you before you do this, you are going to want to write the recipient's name, the return address. Don't put the stamp on yet, but we can go ahead and do everything else. If you're going to do stamping on your envelope, make sure your envelope is all ready to go. We can place that inside the folder, and what you get is a true look of linen on your envelope. Beautiful, beautiful, right? I think now you can see why I said you want to do all of your writing, return address and all that. Now is the time you can put your stamp on it and mail it. Let's take that technique one step further. I have put some designer series paper here on the flap of an envelope, Guys, it is a 2 by 6 inch piece. I adhered it down and I simply just cut. Okay, very, very simple. Watch what happens when we take the flap of this envelope now with designer series paper. We line that up and look at what we get. I don't know if you can really see it on camera, but now that looks like fabric. We got all that great texture from the embossing folder, and it does. It truly just looks like fabric on the back of my envelope flap. It is so, so pretty. We have another embossing folder that has the look of fabric, and that is the subtle embossing folder. I love this one too. It definitely is that. It is more subtle and gives a really great background. In fact, I'm going to bring in a card I received from my friend Vicky. Can you see that beautiful subtle background and what a difference it makes on this card versus just a plain piece of cardstock? Just a nice subtle background. So this is definitely probably one of my all-time favorite embossing folders, specifically for that. It just gives me a nice subtle look. I'm going to do a blast from the past. This was a technique we used to do quite a bit. I have a piece of 4 by 5 1/4 white cardstock. I just quickly just punched some flowers and added some polka dots with a pencil eraser. I'm going to use this to layer on a card. But what I want to do is I want to emboss it. I want to give it some texture. And again, it's going to press down all my adhered flowers, and it's going to give this really great look. Now, since I have this in here, there's this line here on my embossing folder. Do you know I use that quite a bit? Because I can place that inside my embossing folder, and I can use that line to make sure I'm perfectly straight. Let's run this through and see what we get. Again, remember, we want the folded side to go into the machine. There we go. Can you see all that texture and how it pressed down my flowers? And again, now it really kind of looks like fabric. I can take that and I can just add that to a white card base. Now, simply maybe add some ribbon, sentiment, or focal image, and I'm ready to go. But I love, love, love creating these kind of faux fabric images, especially with die cut images. It really, really is stunning. So earlier you saw me dry emboss on vellum and we got that really great look. Did you know you could do that same thing and you can dry emboss on our acetate boxes or our window sheets? I hope you can see that. That is just a really, really fun look. How about we do it with one of our clear, tiny treat boxes? I'm just going to lay that inside our Seabed 3D embossing folder. Let's see what we get when we run this through. All right, check this out. I can now just put my little box together, and there we go. I know on camera it's very hard to see, but let me tell you, it sure adds a great look to one of our simple little clear treat boxes. All right, this one is absolutely crazy. We double embossed. Let me show you what I did here. I decided to go ahead and go crumb cake again, 4 by 5 1/4. I have two different embossing folders. I have the old world paper 3D embossing, and then I have Scripty. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take that cardstock and we're gonna run it through our old world embossing folder first. And we get this great texture. Now I want the texture side up, and now I'm going to come along with Scripty. Now remember, this one does have a straight line. So I'm gonna use the line of my embossing folder, and now we're gonna run that through our machine. And I hope that you can see we have a true double emboss image. Now, you may notice here, Connie, yours is like really popping. All right, we're gonna get into some techniques now of how you can use your embossing folders and make the embossed images pop. And so this one here, I did using a sponge, and I used my soft suede ink. I'm going to bring in some grid paper because I'm gonna ink up that sponge and I wanna tap off just a little bit. And you want to use a very light touch. And can you see when you rub that sponge over, it touches just what is sticking up, that great embossed image. Now it's still picking up just a little bit of the old world paper folder, but not too much. The scripty's really showing through, but we still get the old world paper kind of shining through. It's a very fun technique, and I want to tell you the key here is a light touch. Less is more. You can always add more ink, but you can't take it away. So you want to do this just like you were, I always like to say, like you were petting a bunny, or you were petting a little baby's fresh head, right? Just a nice little touch. We don't want to press too hard because we don't want that sponge going deep down. We just want it to stay right there on top. So there you can kind of see how that looks. Actually, I think I sponged that one with crumb cake. This one I did with early espresso. And you know what? I was totally wrong. That was Sahara sand cardstock. So forgive me, Connie needs more coffee. But hey, look, I just showed you what it looks like on a different color of cardstock. Either way, I think it's gorgeous. So let's now go into inking techniques with your embossing folders. So we've talked a lot about different ways to use the embossing folders. Now let's bring our ink into it. So I just shared with you the technique of using a sponge on your folders. Now this one here is the the Parisian flourish. And you can see, I've already done some of it for you. I can keep it that soft color, but I can come and add more. Remember I said you can always add more and you can't take it away? The more you want to add, just keep adding. But like I said, I always dab off first because I don't want to get, for lack of a better word, I don't want it to get messy. I don't want a big blob hitting that. So I always like to tap off first. So there we go, a great way to make that image pop. Now we're going to go really crazy. Ready? I'm going to take this one, and to do this, I took my ink pad, and again, very lightly, you're just going to take your ink pad and really lightly just go over the cardstock. You know, I'm looking at this now and I'm thinking about that tin tile die. Doesn't that, it does, it kind of reminds you of the old tin tile. So I think this technique with the direct ink pad to your embossed image would be great with that folder too. But I really like that look. Let's move on to another one. And for this one, I'm going to show you two. So for this, I use the Whisper White Craft Pigment ink. So this is a very, very wet ink. It's very different than our regular ink. So this one here, I did the white ink with a sponge. This one here, I did the white ink by just going right over it. And then I actually added some clear embossing powder to this because it was very wet. And so I decided, oh, let's see what would happen if I put some embossing powder on it, and whoo, is it pretty. You notice this one, more of the ink got down into the crevices, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. But I really do like this soft look, but you're going to have embossing folders that are probably going to need something bolder. Either way, I don't think you can go wrong by using that white craft ink with your dry embossed folders. All right, this is a technique I love. I'm going to zoom in because I want you to see, oh my goodness, such beautiful shimmer, but it's very, very subtle. Now this was done with our shimmer paint. Now there's a frost white and a champagne mist. So for my lighter colors, I decided to go with the frost white. But if I were doing this on some of my maybe deeper colors, more regal colors, this champagne mist would be awfully pretty. So to do this, you're going to shake the bottle really, really good. There's a little ball in there that's going to make sure that paint gets mixed up really well. I've got just a clear block here. You're going to pour yourself a pretty good little dollop of the paint. Now, I'm going to kind of dab this around. Remember what I showed you about dabbing off first? You do want to kind of do that. I'm using a sponge dauber this time because it's going to use a little less ink. And of course, that's kind of precious ink. Or paint. I don't want to use too much of it. And can you see, just again, light touch, I can go right over this image. Look, now I do want to tell you, this is paint. Okay, this isn't ink, it is paint. So as soon as I am done with this sponge dauber and with this clear block, I do want to take that over to my sink and I want to go ahead and rinse that out. Okay, so I am done, very happy with how that looks. Now I'm simply going to run those under the sink, get all that paint cleaned off. There we go, cleaned, ready to go for my next masterpiece. One more technique I want to share with you, and that is coming in with a Versamark pad. And we're going to do some embossing powder. Just like you kind of saw me do, I'm just going to gently rub my embossed cardstock. I decided to bring in that tin tile because, wow, I just thought that would look so pretty with some gold embossing powder. Yeah, let's see what we get. So just trying to get just the top layer, so I don't want to press too hard. I've got some gold embossing powder here in a little bowl. So let's just get this all covered. All right, I've let my heat tool warm up for about 45 seconds, so it's good and hot. And I'm going to take this and I'm just going to gently melt that embossing powder. And oh, I hope we get a really beautiful image with this tin tile. I'm kind of winging it here, so we'll see what we get. There we go. Woo, can you see that magic? You know, I never get tired of watching embossing powder melt. It's just kind of magical. And there we go. So definitely an old world feel. Now you can see I missed right here. And I'm going to tell you, this is exactly what I'm going to do so I can still use this image. I'm just going to cut it down. So I'm going to cut it down to, let's try 3 3/4. No, I better go a little bit more. We're going to go 3 1/2. And I'll go this side and we're going to go 4 3/4. And now we can just layer that onto a piece of soft suede. Now, I'm actually glad that I needed to do this in front of you because I have a technique that you need to know. When you have a dry embossed image, a lot of the surface area of your cardstock is taken away. So when I go and add just little dots of adhesive, well, unfortunately, this might not lay down very well. So I want you to go all the way down, all 4 sides of a dry embossed image because again, like I said, we just don't have that much surface area. And if you want, you can bring in a little in the middle because we want this to lay flat and we want it to stay in place, right? You can see we don't have any of that little buckling or any of it just appears that the cardstock is well adhered. I don't know how else to word it, but it really does make a difference to go ahead, add your adhesive all the way around on a dry embossed image. We want it stuck down well, right? And there we go, my friends. 15 or more creative ways you can use embossing folders in your hand stamped cards. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope that you picked up a new tip or two. Hey, be sure to take one of these ideas this week, create a great card, send it off. I'm going to just guarantee you right now, when people get a card with a dry embossed image, they can't help but touch it. They just want to touch it. And I think that's what makes a dry embossed image so unique. So I hope that you'll give that a try. Be sure to tune in throughout the month of January 2021. I've got more masterclass ideas coming up. So be sure to stay tuned for those. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. I look forward to stamping with you next week. Bye-bye.